go. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Fish the Moment. This morning we are going to be fishing Hare jigs for some super deep spotted bass and largemouth, and I've been crushing them all summer long on this Hare jig out here on Table Rock, and I haven't been able to get it on film for whatever reason. It's always happening during my on-the-water fishing lessons, but I want to show you guys how I'm fishing this Hare jig, the ways that I present the baits to fish, types of Hare jigs I use, all kinds of stuff to put a ton of good bass in the boat. So let's get into it. Oh, there we go, beautiful fish. Man, that fish bit me in 40 feet of water, guys. That is crazy. Fishing this Hare jig off of a long point here, and I've been catching fish every morning for the first like hour and a half to 2 hours on this Hare jig on spots. You can see a fish just busted over here on these places where these fish are chasing bait up in the morning. And I'll get into why the Hare jig is good here. I'll show you graph images, all kinds of stuff. But it's a bait that is not fished that much in the summertime on these deep, clear lakes. A lot of people fish this bait on the Tennessee River on ledges, places like that, but it can be an awesome bait when you're fishing on these deep, clear lakes. And so let's get into exactly how I'm fishing it. Oh, there he was. They're biting it every single drop. There he is. Got him. I'm telling you guys, this bait is so good, and you can just catch so many fish on it. And basically, I'm just letting that thing fall down there, and I'm reeling it through them, and you can catch some toad spotted bass on it. What I find is the average quality of these spots I catch on this Hare jig, guys, is like 1.5 pounds to 2.5 pounds. And all those fish that were nipping at it a second ago and weren't biting it, those are the fish that are too small to take the jig in their mouth, and I can't even get it out of them. They choke this bait when they get it. When you get a good one, they'll eat it. And man, that's the quality fish I'm catching on this. And I find that a lot of times you can catch fish on like a drop shot in these areas, things like that, Ned rig, but they're gonna be a lot of those smaller fish. But when you get a fish to bite this Hare jig, they're gonna be quality like that. Woo, dude, I'm so pumped. There we go, nice fish. Guys, I love fishing this Hare jig. It's literally one of my favorite ways to fish. Okay, so all I'm doing with this bait, guys, I'm just casting it out there, and I'm fishing in 40 feet of water right now, which is really deep. And so I'm letting the thing sink down. It's a 1/2 ounce Hare jig, so it takes probably 20 seconds for it to get down there. And I'm just feeding it line, waiting until it gets down the bottom. Then once that bait gets down there and it hits the bottom, what I'm actually gonna do is, so waiting for it to fall, it takes forever in 40 foot, but once it hits the bottom, I'm going to put my rod at the 11 o'clock position. I'm not gonna have my rod pointed straight at the bait. I'm gonna put my rod straight up in the air. You can see from this camera, it's literally straight up. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reel my reel handle 5 or 6 times really, really fast. And then I'm gonna give some slack to the bait and let it fall down to kind of like a semi-slack line. And what that's doing is it's popping that Hare jig off the bottom, maybe 6 to 10 feet. And then it's gonna fall back down through those fish. And there's a big school of spotted bass on this spot, and they're basically just chasing bait all morning. And so when I'm reeling that Hare jig up through them, it looks like a fleeing bait fish. And then when it stops and starts to fall back down, it looks like a dying bait fish. And they cannot stand it, and they just crush this thing when they get it. And so other than just the standard retrieve of letting that thing fall to the bottom, reeling it 5, 6, 7 times really quick, and then popping off the bottom and then giving it some slack, I'll sometimes vary up how many times I reel it and how fast I reel it. And that will kind of trigger different fish to bite. And so sometimes when the fish are really high off the bottom, I might reel that bait like 9, 10 times and then let it fall. And sometimes when I do that, I actually give it some line to go back down to the bottom. And that will pop that bait up really high in the water. So if there's fish that are suspended 10, 12, 15 feet off the bottom, it'll target those fish. But I actually graphed over this school right here, and I saw they were only maybe 5 to 7 feet off the bottom. So there's no reason for me to pop that jig up so high. So I can just reel it 5, 6 times like that, and that's gonna be good enough. And again, when you're fishing this bait, all you're waiting for is a little tick on your line. And there's going to be the temptation, oh God, there it was, just like that, to set the hook on them. And so instead of setting the hook when you feel the tick, a lot of times they're not gonna get it. And so by setting the hook, you're pulling it away from those fish too much. And so all I do is when I feel that bite, I literally reel and just pull my rod up. So showing you from this angle, when I get that bite, I just reel and pull a little bit. I don't like set the hook really hard like that, because you're a lot of times going to just rip that bait away from those fish, because again, they're not going to always get it. A lot of times they'll just kind of pull up and just kind of tap it. But again, when you get those good ones to bite, they'll choke it. And you saw both the fish I caught this morning off this spot were really, really good ones. And those are the fish I'm looking for. And again, I could go up here, throw a drop shot, fish vertically on these fish, no problem, probably catch a bunch of fish. I actually just did a video on that, guys, off this exact spot a couple weeks ago. But I've been catching fish not just in like 40 feet of water. I've also been catching them on these points with creek channels that swing by them in 10 feet of water, 20 feet of water, 30 feet of water, and now all the way out to 40. And these fish have moved deeper as the summer's progressed. And so when I was first fishing out here in like May, first week of May, second week of May, those fish were up there in 10 foot of water on these points. Then as you got into June, they got up to like 15 feet of water. And then into the first couple weeks of July here, they've gone to 30 and now 40 feet. And so these fish will change how deep they are depending on the thermocline and depending on the lake conditions as far as water clarity and stuff like that. And so you definitely want to keep an open mind as far as how deep you fish. But right now, this school is going here in 40 foot, and I can't get too many more bites on this Hare jig. I think what happened is I caught the bigger fish out of the school, and all the rest of them there down there, just little ones just tapping at it. And that's pretty common. So I'm gonna pull up on top of these fish in a second, drop a drop shot on them to try to clean up a little bit. But normally you'll catch a few, oh, there he's again. You'll get a few bites on this drop, or this Hare jig. You get a bunch of bites on the Hare jig, but the ones you catch will be the good ones, and then you'll just get a ton of those taps, which again are just a small fish.
So as you can see, that Hare jig is a great way to catch some good bass, but it's definitely not a bait that works all the time, and I only pick it up in very specific situations. And normally I can tell if the fish are gonna eat that Hare jig by how they look on my down imaging on my fish finder, and I wanna show you that right now. So whenever I'm graphing over offshore structure and I see fish suspended 5 to 10 feet off the bottom of my down imaging, I know they're most likely going to bite a Hare jig. And if you look at some of the recordings from some of the spots I was fishing this morning, you notice that there are some good groups of bass, and a lot of these bass are suspended 5 to 7 feet off the bottom. And all I was doing again was reeling that Hare jig up through those fish. And if I tried to throw a shaky head or a jig on the bottom through these fish, a lot of times the bait would go underneath these fish and they would never bite it, because in the summertime especially, bass will feed upward and they're not going to look down at the bottom when they're actively feeding and chasing. And so you need a bait that will go up over the fish's head and then fall back down through them to trigger a bite. And in addition to the Hare jig, I also like to fish baits like a flutter spoon, a slab spoon, and a swim bait. But I found that this Hare jig is the most consistent way for me to put good fish in the boat, and it also triggers a lot more bites than those other two baits for me, especially in the summertime. And this bait doesn't just work on deep clear lakes like Table Rock, it'll also work on dirtier water lakes. For example, I filmed a video last year on Lake Uchi in Oklahoma, which has 2 feet of water visibility, and was crushing them on this Hare jig, catching 5 and 6 pounders on it. And as you can see in this image, these fish again were 5 to 6 feet off the bottom on this offshore ledge. And I actually won a college fishing regional championship with my fishing partner on Lake Dardanelle in July, fishing a Hare jig. And we put our 2 biggest bass of the day in the boat, fishing that Hare jig in about 8 to 9 feet of water over the top of an underwater roadbed. And we saw some fish on the graph suspended in about 5-6 feet of water, over 10 feet of water, and we still caught fish even that shallow on that Hare jig. And so you don't have to fish this bait super deep, but it does work in 10 feet of water all the way out to 40 and 50 feet of water. So it's a very versatile bait, and whenever those bass are keying in on shad, it is one of my best baits to trigger big bass and put them in the boat.
So guys, now let's get into the specific Hare jigs I throw and the equipment I throw them on. And as far as my Hare jigs, I'm not super brand loyal. These Hare jigs are kind of expensive, and so I normally try to find the cheapest ones that I can get my hands on, just because I lose a lot of them with that open hook. I'll just hang them in brush piles and sanding timber and stuff like that. And really the key to my Hare jigs is that I need to be throwing a 1/2 ounce Hare jig, so a 1/2 ounce head. I also want it to have a pretty long bucktail, anywhere anywhere from 4 to 5 inches long. And so if your Hare jigs that you buy don't have a very long tail on them, they don't seem to work as well. And also if they're really heavy, like a 3/4 or a 1 ounce Hare jig, those aren't going to work either. They fall too fast. And so a 1/2 ounce Hare jig is the perfect size, and then a 3 to 4 inch tail. And so some of the ones I've been throwing recently are this one. This is the Ben Parker Hare jig, and it was on closeout on Tackle Warehouse for like $3. That's why I'm fishing them. And it has some nice feathers in there and some tinsel. And then this is actually a striper Hare jig that I found at Academy Sports years back, like 7 years ago. And I've been throwing it since, and it's just a 1/2 ounce striper Hare jig. It's like $2.99, and it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of like the feather and the tinsels that this jig has, but it still works really well. It gets the job done, and I really like it. And so don't get too concerned about the brand of Hare jig or getting the most expensive one. Just find the jig that has 1/2 ounce and has about a 4 to 5 inch tail feather on it, and you'll be good to go. And one question I get a lot when I'm talking about Hare jigs is what trailer I put on the jig. And I actually don't put any trailer. I just leave it as is, stock out of the package. You don't need to put like a chunk or anything on there. And so I just throw it as is out of the package, and I catch a ton of fish on it. And then as far as my equipment goes for fishing this Hare jig, I get really specific with the rod, the line, and the reel that I throw. And so first up, for the rod, I throw a 7'2" medium heavy action Quantum Smoke S3 rod. And this rod is the best Hare jig rod I've ever found. It has a really soft tip to it, and so the tip will bend really nicely on the end, which helps make sure you don't pull the hook out of the fish's mouth when you're fishing that Hare jig. You don't want a super sturdy, stiff rod with this, but you also want a longer rod, because a lot of times I'm fishing this bait like I was today in 40 feet of water, and so you want to be able to get a decent hook set on them. And so a 7'2" medium heavy action Quantum Smoke S3 rod is my go-to when fishing a Hare jig. And I also throw my swim baits on this rod as well, like my 3.5 and 4 inch swim baits when I'm fishing offshore. So I definitely pick up this rod if you're looking for a good offshore rod for these type of baits. And then the line is also really important. I always throw 12-pound fluorocarbon line, and I don't really care too much about what brand I'm fishing, but it just needs to be 12-pound fluorocarbon for a couple reasons. First, the fluorocarbon is invisible in the water, and when you're fishing this bait in super clear water, it helps get you a few extra bites. And also that 12-pound test is pretty thin, and that thin diameter helps this bait fall a little more naturally. And so if you're finding that you're fishing your Hare jig on like 15 or 17-pound test, and you're not getting very many bites, go down to 12-pound test, and you're gonna get probably twice as many bites just by downsizing your line just a little bit. And then as far as my reel, I like a pretty fast gear ratio reel. This is a 6:4 to 1. It's actually an Abu Garcia Black Max, $39. You can buy them in plastic wrap at Walmart or pretty much anywhere that sells fishing equipment. And I love these reels. I've found actually that these reels work just as well as all the high-end reels for me, as long as you spool them up with a lot of the line. So I've normally put about half the spool as like backing of 25-pound Berkley big game, and that's just some cheap filler line, and then I put the other half of the spool with the fluorocarbon, and I can outcast pretty much everyone who I do on the water fishing lessons with, and they all ask me, what reel are you throwing? That has to be a super high dollar reel, and it's just this Abu Garcia Black Max, and I'm outcasting everybody with it. And so it doesn't really matter to me which reel I'm throwing, but the rod is really important. So if you're going to invest in your fishing equipment, get nice rods, and you can go a little bit less expensive on the reel. And just so you guys know, I have been fishing this reel for over a year now, pretty much every fishing trip. It is not worn down on me at all. And so you'll probably have seen it if you go back in all my old videos. I throw it a lot. And so Abu Garcia Black Max, 39 bucks. Definitely pick one up. And one thing I like to do a lot with this Hare jig is kind of fan cast these points. I don't really focus on one particular spot, though you will find like one cast might catch you 2 or 3 fish. What I find is that in the mornings on these big points, these bass will just roam around these points. And so if you focus on one particular spot, like a spot the size of the front deck of my boat, a lot of times you're gonna miss some good fish. And this Hare jig is great because it can actually allow you to cover lots of water. And so you can cast this thing around the points, and as you're reeling it up fast like that, you're able to kind of cover a good distance. And so a lot of times you also call those fish from a good distance to come grab it. And so I'm going to be fan casting this whole point this morning, and not just focusing on one little key spot, which is what I would normally do if it was later in the day. I had a brush pile down there or a specific rock pile. I'd be trying to make a specific cast, but in the mornings it's just fan casting. Okay, so the sun's getting pretty high in the sky here, and so this hair jig bite's probably going to be over in the next 30 minutes. So I'm gonna try to run and check a couple more points and graph over them and see if I can find some fish down there. And a lot of times you have to fish this hair jig bite quick because it'll completely disappear after the first couple hours of the morning. Then you have to go down to like a drop shot, a jig, things like that to get those same fish to bite. And so I'm gonna run a few more points because I am loving this hair jig bite, guys. There we go. Pull up on another point, guys. These fish were set up perfect for that hair jig. That's a good one right there. I love graphing for those fish, guys, seeing them all over the graph, pulling up and then catching them right away. That is what I'm talking about. This is actually a nice largemouth. Look at that one. Man, see, the better sized fish are eating this hair jig. Look how when they eat it, they choke it. I mean, that fish was not getting away. That's a skinny fish, but that's a keeper largemouth out here on Table Rock. And a lot of those little fish aren't gonna eat it, but when you finally do get one, it's gonna be a nice one. That's what I'm talking about, guys. Whew. Catching all three species on this bait: smallmouth, largemouth, and spotted bass. That's what I'm talking about. Beautiful bass right there. Gotta put them back in there and get another one. Again, it is a great way to catch good fish in the mornings, and it works, again, on a lot of different lakes. I catch them on this bait on Lake Dardanelle, which has 1.5 feet of water visibility. I'm catching them here on Table Rock where I have 10 feet of water visibility. And so it's a super versatile bait. Whenever those fish are suspended and they're chasing bait, a lot of times this is the only bait I can actually get them to bite. Sometimes I'll fish a swim bait down there, flutter spoon, things like that, they won't touch it. But then throw that hair jig down there and they'll choke it. And so if you're not fishing this hair jig, you need to get some. I'll link some down in the description below. Oh, nope, hung up. Dang it. And I'm gonna need to go get some too off that same link because you will lose quite a few of these things, especially right here, this spot has some tanding timber on it. So. Well guys, hope you enjoyed this video. I had a blast catching fish this morning on this hair jig, and hopefully you can use this to catch some bigger fish in the first couple hours of the morning on your deep, clear lakes. But now, as you can see, there's pleasure boaters all around me, and that's the problem with fishing on these deep, clear lakes in the summertime. A lot of times you get a lot of boat traffic, and so you can't really fish on these main lake points on the main stretch of the lake after the first, 2-3 hours of the morning. And so I'm actually going to now run into the river over here and show you how you can catch some fish on deep diving crankbaits, swim baits, and football jigs once all of the pleasure boaters get out and you get these giant waves going. And so before I get rocked out of the boat here, I'm gonna end this video, but thanks again for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see y'all in the next one. Hey guys, thanks for checking out the video. Hope you enjoyed, and if you want more content from Fish the Moment, check out my website, fishthemoment.com. On my website, I offer virtual fishing lessons you can do from your home using Google Hangout, on the water fishing lessons where you can go out in your boat and I can show you how to find fish with your electronics and on the water, and also lake breakdowns of some of those popular lakes around the country where I'll give spot recommendations, conditions, and lure recommendations as well. And if you really enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel in a more personal way, donate on my Patreon page. On Patreon, you can give a small monthly donation that helps me continue to make quality content for you guys into the future. And last but not least, check out my social media pages. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I post a lot of great pictures, videos, and articles about bass fishing. So thanks again for checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one.